Michelle had always believed life offered no surprises until she borrowed her aunt's antique necklace for a piano competition. In that moment, a hidden thread connecting past and present began to unravel, revealing a life-altering secret. Stay tuned to discover her story on Inspiring Stories. Michelle stood at her bedroom window in her small coastal hometown, the early morning light revealing a sea washed in pale blues and silver. A gentle mist drifted above the sand, carrying the faint tang of salt. Though she longed for comfort, her heart thumped with anticipation. For she was holding an antique Neclacia thin gold chain with a seashell pendant that once belonged to her grandmother. Its swirling crest seemed a glimmer, a silent keeper of secrets she yearned to understand. The upcoming piano competition weighed heavily on Michelle's mind. Though labeled local, it attracted formidable talent, forcing her to practice relentlessly Chopin at daybreak, Beethoven late into the night. For Michelle, the event was more than a chance to perform. It was an opportunity to prove to herself and potential mentors that she possessed genuine promise. She also carried the legacy of her grandmother, a passionate musician whom Michelle barely remembered. Fragments of lullabies lingered in her memory, like remnants of a dream she could never fully recall. Wearing the necklace felt akin to embracing her grandmother's quiet encouragement. Downstairs, Aunt Clara sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a faded newspaper. Her gaze occasionally flicked to the pendant around Michelle's neck, as if weighing what to say. Michelle sipped her coffee, letting the warm bitterness settle her nerves. She suspected Aunt Clara harbored stories about the necklace but also sensed an unspoken reluctance that kept the past sealed away. Eventually, Aunt Clara asked, "Has that necklace been helping with your jitters?" Michelle smiled, briefly touching the pendant. "It feels like I'm not alone. I think Grandma's spirit is somehow with me." Aunt Clara offered a pensive nod. "Your grandmother believed in the power of music to unite people. She used to say it bridged hearts where words failed." After breakfast, Michelle meandered through town, a humble place with pastel houses chipped by salty winds. Locals working their small shops or fishing along the pier greeted her kindly. Word of the piano competition had spread, and many expressed excitement on her behalf. She'd grown up here, swirling in the briny air and ocean hush that shaped her earliest memories, as changeable as the tide. As she headed along the shoreline, she thought about her grandmother. She recalled fleeting images, a gentle, smiling woman guiding her tiny hands across piano keys, softly humming a lullaby Michelle could barely recall. Back at home, Aunt Clara was usually guarded about the past, yet Michelle felt a shifting openness. It was as though the necklace itself loosened old reservations, stirring something that had long been buried in silence. Mid-morning, Michelle returned to the house to help tidy up. While she washed dishes, the pendant occasionally clinked against the sink, a reminder of the legacy she carried. Aunt Clara stopped with a dish towel in hand and studied the pendant. "You know," Aunt Clara began, "your grandmother used to wear that every day. She'd trace the crest whenever she seemed pensive, as if it reminded her of something she'd lost track of." Michelle turned off the faucet. "Did she ever tell you who gave it to her? Or if it belonged to someone in her family?" Aunt Clara pursed her lips, folding the towel. "She hinted it was part of a bigger story, but each time I tried asking, her eyes misted. I think it brought up painful memories she couldn't face." In the afternoon, Michelle strolled the quiet beach, gathering her thoughts. She settled near a crooked palm tree, a favorite spot for scribbling new melodies. Distantly, seagulls squawked, waves rolled ashore, and the pendant felt reassuring against her chest. She jotted down musical ideas inspired by the hush of the sea, momentarily forgetting the competition's pressure. Each time the pendant twinkled in the sunlight, she sensed an unspoken narrative waiting to be unearthed. That evening, they dined on grilled fish and vegetables. Aunt Clara tentatively mentioned that Michelle's grandmother believed the pendant's crest was only half of something more significant. Though vague, the notion sparked Michelle's curiosity. Why half? What else existed to complete it? Before bedtime, Michelle placed the pendant on her nightstand, letting the moonlight trace its elegant curves. She fell asleep picturing herself at the concert hall, delivering a performance shaped by more than mere technique that embodied her grandmother's legacy. Though uncertain of what lay ahead, she welcomed the comfort of that intangible presence guiding her. The next day, Michelle arrived at the local concert hall for a rehearsal with Miss Rivera, her calm but exacting piano teacher. Their warm-up routine began with scales, arpeggios, and fine-tuning the transitions in Michelle's chosen repertoire. At one point, the seashell pendant slipped from beneath her shirt, catching Miss Rivera's attention. The teacher stopped abruptly, her features taut with an intensity Michelle had never seen. "Michelle," Miss Rivera said quietly, "may I see that necklace?" Uncertain, Michelle removed the pendant and handed it over. Miss Rivera examined the crest, her brow creasing. She eventually murmured, "I've seen this before. My grandmother wore a nearly identical seashell pendant in an old photograph. She used to mention a brilliant pianist named Bertie, who had the matching piece." Michelle's heart pounded. Could her grandmother have been Miss Rivera's grandmother's friend? The necklace suddenly felt laden with a deeper meaning, suggesting an unforeseen link between their families. Miss Rivera placed it gently back into Michelle's hand, saying, "I have something to show you after our session." The rest of the lesson was a blur. Michelle struggled to focus, her thoughts fixed on the possibility of an improbable connection. Once they finished, Miss Rivera led her to a storage room at the back of the concert hall, dusty with disuse. Rummaging in an old trunk, she pulled out a worn photograph. The grainy image depicted two women by a piano, arms linked in camaraderie. One wore a pendant that matched Michelle's. Miss Rivera pointed to the other woman in the photo. "That's my grandmother, Dolores. She said her friend was a gifted musician, but something separated them. Your grandmother could be that friend." Michelle felt dizzy with excitement and disbelief. She recalled Aunt Clara's cryptic remarks about her grandmother's longing, the suggestion that the crest was only half of a larger puzzle. Now Miss Rivera's account pointed to a lost friendship neither of them had known existed. Michelle left the concert hall trembling, the photograph etched into her mind like an unfinished chord waiting for resolution. That evening, Michelle told Aunt Clara about Miss Rivera's revelation. Aunt Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed caught in a swirl of indecision. At length, she nodded slowly. "I never heard your grandmother called Bertie," she admitted. "But if Miss Rivera's grandmother had the same necklace, there's no way this is a coincidence." Early the next day, they ventured into a cluttered closet where Aunt Clara stored boxes of old keepsakes. Dust motes twirled through a single overhead bulb as they rummaged among yellowed sheet music, half-finished sewing projects, and postcards from faraway places. Eventually, Michelle unearthed a fabric pouch hidden beneath newspapers. Inside lay a bundle of handwritten letters bound by a simple ribbon. Aunt Clara inhaled sharply. "I thought these were lost." Michelle carefully opened the top envelope, the ink faint yet legible. It was addressed, "My dearest friend Bertie," and signed Dolores. The contents detailed regrets about a forced separation, references to a dream of touring the world with music, and repeated mention of a pair of special seashell pendants. One letter said, "When we stand side by side again, we will complete the inscription." Hands trembling, Michelle turned to her aunt. "Miss Rivera's grandmother is named Dolores. It has to be the same person. These letters were written to my grandmother. She must be Bertie." Aunt Clara stared at the letters, sadness shining in her eyes. "Your grandmother never told me about Dolores. Maybe it hurt too much, thinking she'd never see her again." Realizing that fate had unexpectedly dropped them into a legacy their grandmothers left unfinished, Michelle gently tucked the letters back into the pouch. She felt a surge of responsibility if their grandmothers had been separated by circumstance. Perhaps she and Miss Rivera could bring closure to that fractured bond. They arranged to meet Miss Rivera again at the concert hall, letters in hand. Miss Rivera's demeanor was simultaneously eager and apprehensive. Together they spread out the letters and photograph on a small table backstage, carefully examining each line. The story that emerged was bittersweet. Bertie and Dolores had been aspiring pianists with matching pendants, determined to travel and perform side by side. However, an unspoken tragedy broke in Foster's, family separations, or other upheaval kept them apart forever. Miss Rivera traced her grandmother's cursive with a trembling finger. "She spoke of a friend she lost, but never told me enough to search for her. If only we had known." Aunt Clara stood silently, processing the weight of revelations that spanned decades. Michelle sensed a complex blend of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the missed opportunities, relief that the truth was finally surfacing. In that moment, Michelle understood she'd inherited something far beyond a simple necklace-ish, was carrying a piece of history that yearned for resolution. With only a week left until the piano competition, Michelle felt torn between final rehearsals and her desire to explore this newfound family connection. Yet somehow, her discovery fueled her artistry rather than distracting her. She found herself playing with fresh emotion, channeling what she imagined Bertie and Dolores once shared. Her Chopin polonaises and Beethoven sonatas now breathed with renewed spirit, as if her grandmother stood at her shoulder, guiding her hands across the keys. The small coastal town hummed with rumors of Michelle's progress, though few knew the entire story. Aunt Clara delved deeper into the attic and found more sheets of music scrawled with personal notes, while Miss Rivera uncovered diaries from Dolores. One diary entry described how Bertie and Dolores planned a grand duet, but a sudden life crisis forced them to cancel at the last minute. They never managed to reschedule. The day before the competition, Miss Rivera approached Michelle between runs of a Beethoven piece. The Historical Society archivist found an old concert program listing Bertie and Dolores as co-pianists. They were supposed to perform together but never did. I was thinking, perhaps we can honor that dream after your solo at the competition. A short duet taken from Dolores's old notes. Michelle's heart soared. She could barely speak as she agreed. The notion felt right, like stitching up a tear in a cherished heirloom left unresolved for too long. That evening, Michelle stayed late at the hall, practicing the secret duet Miss Rivera had arranged. Each chord resonated with the yearning of two grandmothers long gone. Michelle pictured them smiling, feeling their presence in every careful note. Competition day arrived in a swirl of excitement and nerves. A throng of onlookers filled the modest concert hall, family, friends, and strangers. Aunt Clara sat near the front, twisting her hands in her lap. Miss Rivera offered Michelle a final whispered pep talk backstage. "You've worked hard," she said gently. "Play with your heart." Michelle stepped on stage, her seashell pendant resting above her racing pulse. The house lights dimmed, the hush growing profound. She began her solo piece, a stirring Chopin nocturne that she had honed over countless pre-dawn practice sessions. Each delicate phrase seemed to shimmer, the notes drifting like ocean breezes. Time dissolved for Michelle, replaced by the rapt focus of mind and body melding with the music. Applause thundered when she finished, but Michelle lifted a hand to signal she had more to share. Drawing a steady breath, she addressed the audience. "My grandmother once hoped to perform a special piece alongside a dear friend. Tonight, with Miss Rivera's help, I'd like to honor that dream." The concert hall buzzed with anticipation as Miss Rivera joined her at the piano. Together, they began a duet, salvaged from Dolores's old scorce and uplifting, intertwined melody that rose and fell in graceful harmony. It felt like bridging past and present, each measure tying Bertie's story to Dolores's. In the front row, Aunt Clara covered her mouth with one hand, tears glistening. When the last chord reverberated, the hall erupted in applause so powerful Michelle's chest ached. She bowed, glancing at Miss Rivera through damp eyes. Somehow, they had completed what Bertie and Dolores never could, healing a generations-old rift through music. Although Michelle did not win first prize, the judges praised the soulful depth of her performance. In the subsequent days, a quieter victory took shape. Aunt Clara hosted a small celebration, inviting Miss Rivera and a few neighbors who'd supported Michelle. They gathered around the living room, where pictures of Bertie and Dolores were set side by side on a table. The old letters lay open, telling their story to anyone who would listen. In a poignant moment, Miss Rivera produced a tiny pendant from her handbag, a seashell, half that perfectly complemented Michelle's crest. Placing them together revealed the inscription, "Where hearts unite, hope endures." A hush settled over the room as the two halves locked into a single whole. Michelle stared at the completed emblem, feeling tears burn the corners of her eyes. For so long, the necklace had been a solitary reminder of her grandmother, but now it represented something far greater. The endurance of a friendship lost to time, revived by sheer happenstance in another generation. Aunt Clara wept quietly, a half smile curving her lips. That evening, Michelle walked the beach alone. The two joined pendants hung around her neck, a tangible bond linking her to Birdie's unfinished story. The distant rumble of surf soothed her, and she felt a radiant warmth within, as if her grandmother's lullaby were echoing across the wind. Standing at the water's edge, she whispered her gratitude to Aunt Clara for trusting her, to Miss Rivera for unearthing connections, and to fate for leading her to complete the promise Birdie and Dolores once made. The future gleamed like the moonlit sea before her, wide and full of possibility. And so the tale found its resolution not in finality, but in the currents of hope that continued flowing through each life it touched. In forging a new bond, two families transcended old sorrows, and a gifted young pianist discovered that music could fulfill the dreams of those who came before her. Even as she left her footprints in the wet sand, Michelle felt the presence of Birdie and Dolores' two spirits, shining through every note she played, urging her onward into a future woven from love, memory, and a promise at last made whole.